Imagine the chill of a stone floor beneath your bare feet, the air thick with the metallic tang of old blood and the cloying scent of incense. This is not a battlefield. This is a chamber of faith, a place where salvation is sought through suffering. For centuries, under the watchful eye of the Spanish Inquisition, this was the reality, for thousands accused of heresy. And for women, the path to this room was terrifyingly short. A whispered rumor, a jealous glance, a refusal to conform, any could be the spark that lit the pyre of accusation. In the sprawling kingdoms of Aragon and Castile, a new order had risen, forged in the fires of religious fervor. The year was 1478, and the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand II and Isabella I, had unleashed a force that would cast a long, dark shadow across the Iberian Peninsula and beyond. They called it the Tribunal of the Holy Office of the Inquisition, but it would become known in hushed, fearful tones as Clause Suprema. Its purpose was singular: to enforce religious uniformity, to root out the dissenter, the heretic, the unbeliever. The air itself seemed to crackle with suspicion. In sun-drenched plazas and winding cobblestone alleys, neighbors watched neighbors. Priests, in their Sunday sermons, spoke of the devil's insidious whispers, of hidden corruption festering within the community. An asterisk edicto de fe, a public decree, would be read aloud, listing supposed heresies and inviting the faithful to denounce those they suspected. It was a poison that seeped into the heart of society, turning trust to terror. For women, this new world was a minefield. The Inquisition's gaze fell disproportionately upon them. A woman who possessed knowledge of herbs and healing was a potential witch, a basilisk bruja. A midwife who lost a child during birth might be accused of a pact with Satan. A widow who inherited property and lived independently was a challenge to the patriarchal order. Even a wife who dared to voice an opinion contrary to her husband's could be seen as insubordinate, her spirit tainted by pride, a cardinal sin. The accusation, once made, was a condemnation in itself. There was no need for evidence, no right to a defense. One night, a sharp rap on the door would shatter the domestic silence. Men in dark, hooded robes, their faces obscured by shadow, would enter. They were the asterisk familiaris, asterisk, the lay servants of the Holy Office. No explanation was given. The accused was simply taken, dragged from her home as her family watched in helpless horror, and plunged into the abyss. Her new home was a cell, dark, damp, and suffocatingly small. The only sounds were the drip of water, the scuttling of rats, and the distant muffled moans of other prisoners. Days bled into weeks. She was given no information about her accuser or the specific charges against her. This isolation, this gnawing uncertainty, was a form of torture in itself. Fear was the Inquisition's primary tool, a solvent meant to break down the will long before the body. The inquisitors were not seeking truth, they were manufacturing confession. The chamber was unnervingly quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of her arrest. High above, a single wooden beam stretched across the ceiling, a thick rope threaded through an iron pulley. It was a simple assembly, almost primitive. This was the asterisk strapado chales, no blades, no fire, no elaborate machinery. And yet, its reputation preceded it, whispered in the dungeons as a torment that could break a soul without shedding a single drop of blood. It was not an execution, they said. It was persuasion. She was led before the device, her thin prison shift doing little to ward off the subterranean chill. Her wrists were bound behind her back, the coarse rope biting into her skin. The other end was attached to the pulley's hook. An inquisitor, a man whose face was a mask of detached piety, stood in the corner, a scribe seated beside him with quill and ink at the ready. With a faint, almost imperceptible nod from the inquisitor, the executioner began to turn the winch. The ascent was slow, agonizingly so. First, the strain in her wrists, then the searing fire that shot through her shoulders as they took the full weight of her body. Her feet left the floor. She dangled, a human pendulum in a cathedral of pain. The world spun. The pressure was immense, a deep, grinding agony as her shoulder joints stretched, groaned, and finally, with a sickening internal pop, dislocated. A scream tore from her throat, but it echoed unanswered in the vaulted room. What made the asterisk strapado so diabolically clever was its veneer of mercy. In the meticulously kept records of the Holy Office, it was often classified as a moderate interrogation method, one that left no visible scars, no open wounds to betray its brutality. But the unseen damage was catastrophic. Muscles were shredded, nerves irrevocably crushed. Many victims lost the use of their arms forever. The torture could be escalated with the squasation asterisk, sudden drops that sent jolts of white-hot agony through the dislocated joints, compounding the internal trauma. The questions came, relentless and calm. Do you confess to witchcraft? Who are your accomplices? Have you consorted with the devil? Each denial was met with another turn of the winch, another hoist into the air. Silence was interpreted as defiance. A scream was a sign of a guilty conscience fighting the truth. There was no escape. The only way down, the only path to relief, was to give them the words they wanted to hear. Countless women endured this torment from the late 15th century well into the 18th, in Inquisition chambers from the sun-baked cities of Spain to the far-flung colonies of the New World. In the detached, theological language of the Inquisitors, this was not punishment. It was a sacred act of purification, a necessary trial by fire to cleanse a soul tainted by heresy. But for the woman hanging in the dark, it was simply a descent into a hell created by men who claimed to speak for God. In the flickering torchlight, it looked like a monstrous creature of the deep, a metallic predator clinging to the cold stone wall. Its shape was a deliberate perversion of the feminine form, long, curved iron arms ending in sharpened claws or hooked prongs. The device had many names, but it was most chillingly known as the Iron Spider, or simply Claw la Araña. Its very existence was a testament to a specialized, gendered cruelty, an instrument of agony forged specifically for the bodies of women. The accused was brought forward, her body already weakened by fear and starvation. The chamber was cold, her ragged breathing echoing off the damp walls. The spider was waiting. Often, its metal claws would be heated in a nearby brazier until they glowed a malevolent cherry red. The smell of hot iron and burning coals filled the air, a prelude to the searing pain that was to come. The purpose was not to kill, but to maim, to humiliate, to leave a permanent mark of shame. The executioners, acting on the Inquisitor's silent command, would press the heated prongs against the woman's exposed breasts or abdomen. The sound was sickening, a sharp hiss as metal met flesh, followed by the acrid smell of burning. The pain was beyond comprehension, a white-hot nova that eclipsed all thought, leaving only the primal urge to scream. It was a violation designed not just to inflict physical torment, but to shatter a woman's identity and sense of self. The iron spider was a tool of psychological warfare. Its use was often reserved for women accused of adultery, bearing an illegitimate child, or inducing an abortion, sins that the Inquisition viewed as a corruption of the sacred feminine role. Unlike the public spectacle of an asterisk auto de fe, the spider's work was done in secret, in the deep recesses of the inquisitorial prison. The scars it left, both physical and psychological, were a private, lifelong burden for any who survived. In the cold calculus of the Inquisition, the female body was a battlefield. It was the source of original sin, the vessel of temptation, a gateway through which the devil could enter the world. Therefore, it had to be controlled, subjugated, and, if necessary, broken. Instruments like the iron spider were not random acts of sadism. They were calculated, ritualized acts of domination performed under the solemn guise of religious duty. They were a grim reminder that in this world, a woman's flesh was not her own. The clatter of iron chains was the first sound she heard, a metallic death knell in the oppressive silence. Before her lay a large, rectangular wooden frame, simple in its construction but terrifying in its implication. In the formal records, it was sometimes noted by its Spanish name, Tel Potro, the colt, a grimly ironic name for a device that broke its victims. In English, it was known as the rack. She was not yet guilty, merely accused. But her body was about to be stretched to the breaking point, all for a confession she might not even understand. She was forced onto the frame, her back pressed against the hard wood. Her wrists and ankles were shackled with iron cuffs, which were then attached to ropes threaded around rollers at either end of the frame. The inquisitor stood nearby, his voice a dispassionate drone as he read the charges in Latin, a language she could not comprehend. A notary sat poised, ready to record the moment her spirit finally shattered. The room was a theater of methodical, bureaucratic cruelty. With a signal, the interrogators began to turn the levers connected to the rollers. The ropes grew taut. A dull, pulling ache started in her limbs, a deep thrumming pain that quickly intensified. It felt as if she were being torn apart in slow motion. The questions began again, the same litany of accusations, heresy, witchcraft, blasphemy. With each denial, the levers were given another turn. The sound of the groaning wood mixed with her own involuntary gasps. The pain was a rising tide. It began in the joints, the wrists, elbows, shoulders, ankles, knees, and hips. Ligaments stretched past their limits, threatening to tear. A sickening popping sound echoed in the chamber as a shoulder dislocated, then another. The agony was absolute, an all-consuming fire that burned away thought, memory, and defiance. The goal was not to kill, but to hold the victim in a state of exquisite, unbearable suffering until their will collapsed entirely. Many women who faced the rack were accused on the flimsiest of pretexts, hearsay from a rival, a misunderstanding of a folk remedy, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Trapped in a system that presumed guilt, where the language of the court was alien and the only escape was to confess, the rack became an engine of fabricated truth. A confession obtained under such duress was still considered valid. For the Inquisition, el potro was a silent, indispensable partner, forcing truth not through reason, but through rupture. In this chamber, there was no winch, no frame, no fire. The air was still, the silence profound. The Inquisitor held a small, intricate object in his hand. Forged of iron, it was shaped like a pear, its surface divided into 3 or 4 metal segments or petals. A key-like crank protruded from its base. Known in later centuries as the pear of anguish, this device was an instrument of intimate, internal terror, designed to punish without leaving an external mark. Its application was specific and symbolic. Depending on the alleged crime, it was forcibly inserted into one of the body's orifices. For those accused of heresy or blasphemy, it was the mouth. For women accused of unnatural relations or other moral transgressions, its use was even more violating. The silence of the device was its most horrifying feature. Once inside, the interrogator would turn the screw. Slowly, mechanically, the metal petals would begin to expand, spreading outwards with immense force. It was not a sharp, sudden pain, but a deep, rending pressure that grew with every turn of the key. It caused massive internal tearing, lacerations, and excruciating agony, all while stifling any scream before it could begin. It did not shed blood, at least not visibly, thus technically adhering to the Church's decree that torture should be applied sin effusione sanguinis, without the effusion of blood. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical. The act of forced insertion and internal expansion was a profound assertion of power, a weaponization of the body's most private spaces. It was an act of supreme humiliation, designed to shame and defile, punishing the accused not just for their alleged actions, but for their very nature as a woman, which the inquisitors so often framed as inherently corrupt and susceptible to sin. While explicit mentions in primary Inquisition trial logs are rare, such sensitive procedures were often omitted. The pair of anguish appears in numerous post-Inquisition catalogues of ecclesiastical punishment. It represents the dark ingenuity of an era obsessed with policing morality through ritualized suffering. It was a silent flower of forged metal, blooming with agony in the hidden darkness of the body, a perfect tool for a system that demanded submission in both soul and flesh. It stood in the center of the room like a grotesque parody of a royal throne. Forged from dark hardwood, or cold iron, it was known as the judgment chair, or the interrogation chair. Its every surface, the seat, the backrest, the arms, and even the footrest, was covered with hundreds of sharp iron spikes. It was not a seat of honor, but a throne of agony, designed for a single purpose: to make resistance unbearable. The accused woman was stripped and forced onto the chair. The initial contact was a constellation of sharp, stabbing pains as the spikes pressed into her skin. But that was only the beginning. Iron straps were then used to bind her wrists, ankles, and torso tightly to the chair, ensuring she could not shift her weight or find even a momentary reprieve. Any involuntary movement, any flinch or shudder, would only drive the spikes deeper into her flesh. The cruelty was in the duration. She was left there for hours, sometimes days. The pain was not acute enough to cause her to lose consciousness, but constant and maddening. It was a symphony of torment, with each spike a separate note of agony. To escalate the suffering, torturers would sometimes place a brazier of hot coals beneath the iron chair, heating the metal until it seared the victim's flesh, turning the relentless pressure into burning torture. This device was a tool of coercion, intended to soften the will before further questioning or to extract a confession through sheer exhaustion and pain. The inquisitors would come and go, calmly posing their questions. Confess your pact with the devil, name your accomplices, renounce your heresy. The chair itself became the most persuasive argument. Staying silent meant staying on the spikes. Confessing was the only way out. The judgment chair did not pass sentence. It did not declare guilt or innocence. It simply created a state of suffering so complete, so all-encompassing, that the victim's mind would do anything to make it stop. It was a physical manifestation of the Inquisition's core logic, that truth could be reached through the breaking of the body, that the soul could be saved by subjecting the flesh to hell on earth. In the eyes of its creators, it was an instrument of justice. For its victims, it was a throne of despair. The Spanish Inquisition did not invent cruelty, but it perfected its administration. It transformed torture from a chaotic act of violence into a cold, bureaucratic system. Under the banner of faith, it weaponized fear, shame, and the very flesh of its victims to enforce an iron-willed obedience. The rack, the spider, the strappado, these were not merely tools of punishment, but instruments of control, designed to dismantle a person from the inside out. How did a religious institution, founded on principles of love and salvation, come to justify such methodical torment? The answer lies in a worldview that saw the human body as a corrupt and temporary vessel, and the soul as an eternal prize. To the inquisitors, the pain they inflicted was a holy act, a terrible but necessary surgery to cut the cancer of heresy from the body of Christ, and to save the individual soul from eternal damnation, even if it meant destroying its earthly host. But this theological justification rings hollow against the silent screams that echo through the centuries. As the 16th century physician Johann Weyer, one of the few who dared to publicly oppose the witch trials, wrote, "The cruelty of these men is not less than that of the tormentors of the martyrs." The Inquisition's legacy is not one of souls saved, but of lives shattered. It stands as a chilling monument to the horrors that can be unleashed when absolute power is wedded to absolute certainty.